समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
As harsh winter segues into early spring, US backed negotiations between Russia and Ukraine in Geneva have ended once again without a breakthrough, and I would say expectedly so. In 3 more days, the Russia Ukraine war will enter its 5th year. Why does peace remain so elusive, and what is really happening in the war? While global attention shifts from Davos to Munich to high profile technology summits such as the Global AI Impact Summit, the wars that require resolution remain stubbornly resistant to closure, whether in Ukraine or in the Middle East. Regarding the former, which is Ukraine, not only has a decisive outcome been evasive, something I have called successive years of unvictory in my earlier writings, even the prospect of a ceasefire appears uncertain. This is unfolding well into and despite Donald Trump's presidency in the US. So let me explain some sobering self-restraints operating on Trump. In the Russia-Ukraine war, the gap between preferred outcomes and battlefield realities has widened. At a strategic level, the limits of American leverage under Trump have become evident. The US's shrinking ability to impose a settlement is not, something of a mystery, but it's actually quite structural. Why? Because in the harsh terrain of geopolitics, leverage flows from financial commitment. In 2025, US military aid to Ukraine fell by a 99% compared to the previous year. In 2026, direct American assistance, military or humanitarian, has effectively dropped to zero. The burden now has shifted entirely to Europe, and it has carried it no matter how painfully. The question to ask there is, for how long can Europe continue doing so? But as of now, it has committed for the foreseeable future. And this marks a radical departure from 2022 to 2024, when Washington, under the Biden years, was Kiev's principal financer. Today, Europe finances Ukraine's war effort, sustains its budgetary needs, and delivers humanitarian relief as well. Without financial skin in the game, Washington's ability to shape outcomes has diminished proportionally. The interesting part is that Trump has himself imposed these self-restraints on having a decisive say in the Ukraine war. The US, of course, may facilitate talks in good faith, and Europeans are definitely going to rally around Trump to keep him engaged, but he can no longer dictate terms unilaterally. There is another reason for Trump's limits on Ukraine, and those reasons spring from a domestic factor to which I will return shortly. But coming back to Europe, European solidarity 5 years into the conflict and despite cracks in Hungary and Slovakia remains remarkably intact and functional. For 2026 and 2027, the European Parliament has already approved a 90 billion euro loan in assistance for Ukraine. Military aid from individual European states continues to flow out as well. Notably, Europe's surge in military aid has not come at the expense of humanitarian support. In 2025 alone, European military assistance shot up by 67%, while the humanitarian aid increased by 59%. Germany and the UK together now account for roughly two-thirds of Western Europe's military aid to Ukraine. Northern Europe, which means the Scandinavian countries, etc., they have emerged as the second largest donors. Beyond the Euro-Atlantic sphere, countries like Japan, under robust leadership and a clear vision of security, has sustained financial assistance touching $20 billion to date. South Korea, a major beneficiary of Europe's financial instruments for militarization, such as what is known as SAFE, which is Security Action for Europe, is already considering joining NATO mechanisms to finance US weapons purchases for Ukraine under the Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List, or the PURL initiative. And why not? Considering the growing military entrenchment between Russia and North Korea, South Korea doesn't seem to have too many options. The bottom line is stark and telling. Within a year, Europe has moved from structural reliance on American military assistance to taking the driver's seat and supporting Ukraine militarily. This is no small feat and nobody expected it. And what it proves is that the war's trajectory in 2026 is therefore a function of how inversely proportional US and European leverage has turned out. One has declined and the other has significantly increased. The future of the Ukraine war, then, is primarily about how long Europe can stay committed to its cause. And now let's look at another factor, which is Russia's Pyrrhic unvictory. On the battlefield, tactical developments have also come with their own repercussions. Consider the 27th January post on X by Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski, which openly called on Elon Musk to cut off Russia's access to Starlink after a Russian Geran drone struck a moving train in northern Ukraine, which killed 5 and wounded 2. Now, the Geran drones, which are Russian variants of Iran's Shahid drones, have been in use since 2022, which is right from the beginning of the war. But continuous upgrades and modifications have now enabled the Gerans to be equipped with Starlink satellite terminals, allowing real-time navigation, often rendering them immune to Ukrainian electronic jamming. Now, Western sanctions do prohibit the export of these terminals to Russia, and yet Moscow has reportedly circumvented restrictions through smuggling these networks in Central Asia and in the Middle East, particularly via the UAE. Shell companies, forged documentation, and activation in regions where Starlink usage is legal has allowed thousands of terminals to reach Russian operators. Ukrainian intelligence has also reported the registration of terminals using Ukrainian passports from occupied territories in Donbass, which is Donetsk and Lugansk. Now, Kyiv has, to its credit, responded decisively. Under the new defense minister, the 35-year-old Mikhailo Fedorov, Ukraine formalized a rule that only officially registered terminals would function within Ukrainian territory. Now, earlier this month, Starlink blocked all terminals geolocated in Ukraine, including those used by Ukrainian forces, until verified. And here's the interesting bit. They were then re-included on daily updated whitelists. Terminals not whitelisted were disabled. Moreover, even approved whitelisted terminals would automatically shut down if moving faster than 90 km per hour, which basically means that this significantly limits their use in drone operations. And by 9th February, Russia's access to Starlink within Ukrainian territory had been effectively blocked. Musk publicly confirmed steps to prevent unauthorized Russian use. The operational consequence was quite immediate. Russian forces had built their battlefield communications architecture around Starlink, but had not really developed viable alternatives for mobile operations. Without reliable, fast, and precise satellite connectivity, drone effectiveness dropped and communication among infiltrating Russian units was significantly disrupted. Now, Ukraine capitalized on the window very quickly. Between 9th and 16th February 2026, which is just in 5 days, Ukrainian forces recaptured 201 square kilometers of territory, primarily in Zaporizhia, roughly equivalent to Russia's total gains in December 2025. While Moscow remains on an unwavering path of territorial expansion inside Ukraine, the pace is getting costlier and more disappointing. As of mid-February 2026, Russia controls about 19.5% of Ukrainian territory, which is less than a 1% increase from the same time in 2025, when it was holding about 18.6% of territory. And approximately 6.8% of that 19.5% territory, which includes Crimea and parts of Donbass, had been occupied way before February 2022. That happened in 2014 itself. Now, you can do the math to see how much has Russia really gained in the last 4 years and what is the cost that it has paid. These marginal gains magnify the staggering financial and geopolitical price Russia continues to pay in its pursuit of the Pyrrhic unvictory that repeats year after year. But then there is also a factor of Trump's domestic constraints. Trump's tilt towards Moscow has not yielded dividends for the Kremlin because when US military aid ceased, so too did Trump's leverage. And this is what I was explaining earlier. Moreover, divisions within the Republican Party constrain his actions as well. Significant segments of the GOP, which is short for Grand Old Party, another name for the Republicans, remain supportive of Kyiv. Forcing crippling concessions on Ukraine would require party unity, an unlikely prospect ahead. Trump's immediate priority is to avert an impending setback in the midterms as his popularity ratings have tanked. A loss would strengthen congressional checks and balances, limiting presidential latitude on foreign policy as well. The party's internal fault lines between MAGA and the rest, compounded by scandals such as the Epstein files, render Ukraine a politically risky arena for any more dramatic action. Speculation also persists about potential business deals pushed by Steve Witkoff, who's U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, and Kirill Dmitriev, head of Russia's Sovereign Wealth Fund. Yet, without Republican backing, such arrangements face structural hurdles and would still not lead to pushing Ukraine for a surrender, even if they land up doing a deal. Increasingly and recently, the administration appears far more focused on the Middle East's Board of Peace and Iran than on risking further disruption within the GOP over Ukraine. In fact, one of the Trump's policies is to keep his base and the GOP together by focusing on the commercial dividends from selling weapons to Ukraine. And that brings me to how we should reflect on it in New Delhi. Ukraine's war consequences are now more systemic than ever. New Delhi is already paying the price of a faraway war through unjustified sanctions on itself, which forced a radical departure from its erstwhile policy of importing Russian oil. No comprehensive settlement is on the horizon, and no ceasefire appears imminent. Any strategic planning which is predicated on a soon-to-come peace would make our policies backfire yet again. Therefore, strategic prudence demands further de-hyphenating foreign policy calculations vis-à-vis Moscow and the West, at least as long as the war stretches on. India needs to pragmatically adapt and co-opt to the fact that Russia's entrenchment in Ukraine is not going to go away soon, along with its fallouts that undercut defense and energy ties with India. Remember, the longer the war stretches, the more Russia gets dependent on Chinese tech and systems, and all of this has implications for us. Therefore, as 2026 unfolds, the war continues not because diplomacy has not been absent, but because leverage, interests, and battlefield momentum remain misaligned. There is little evidence to suggest that they will align anytime soon, even when that remains the best-case scenario for New Delhi. I'll be back to discuss more on this grinding war of attrition. Stay tuned.